I am Bob Lingle, and this is the Good Neighbor Podcast. This is a place where I connect with authors and the community. We use this time to discuss life, sometimes death, but always books. I hope you enjoy our conversation today, and I hope you get something out of it. The world is a pretty confusing place right now, so let's do our best to be good neighbors. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight has over 25 years of experience as a grant-funded researcher and as a nationally recognized speaker. She has spoken about ageism in forums across America and also has appeared on numerous podcasts and video productions. Dr. Gendron has a master's degree in gerontology as well as a master's degree in psychology and a PhD in developmental psychology. She serves as chair for the VCU Department of Gerontology and executive director of the Virginia Center on Aging. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tracey Gendron.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Bob.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Before we get into everything, I wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank Anthony Lasasso at Steer Forth Press for getting this set up, and thank you to the viewers that are watching. We are talking with Dr. Tracey Gendron, author of Ageism Unmasked, Exploring Age Bias and How to End It. It was fun reading this book because oftentimes as I'm reading books preparing for a virtual author event, I am taking a lot of notes and writing down questions within the book. And this is the first time that I recall that as I was writing questions, I would page through the book further and then my question was answered, but I'm still going to ask those anyways.
That's great, though. I will take that. That's wonderful.
And there was about halfway through the book, I had a question of like, how has COVID affected this? And then at the end of the book, I realized that COVID was a big catalyst for you writing this book.
Absolutely.
Would you like to talk a little bit about how that inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. And in one way, I think people are really tired of talking about COVID, and I don't blame them for sure. I think we're all exhausted. But for me, I've been thinking about ageism, studying ageism, and really trying to understand it for many, many years. And when COVID came around, what was so fascinating to me at the very beginning was how rampant ageism became. Like it was just everywhere for everybody to see. From, really early sentiments of this is just an old person's disease, so why should we care? To really early sentiments, let's blame young people and call them millennials, whether or not they're millennials, for not adhering to guidelines. The generational stuff, the hashtag boomer remover that was going around, which was so egregious and awful, and all of this manufactured generational tension, it just really got me thinking that now that the spotlight is on ageism, because we also saw more media attention to it, we saw more social media attention to it, it was time for me to really understand it. And that's why I wanted to write this book, because more than just taking a snapshot in time, I wanted to go back to kind of figure out, how did we get here? How did we get to this moment in time? How did we become such a deeply, invisibly ageist culture where it is all around us and yet we don't see it? Because all of that was happening in the media was socially acceptable, all of it. So it was a fascinating moment for me to say, I want to understand more. And I also want to translate what I know and what I have been studying and thinking for other people that don't know and haven't spent 10 years, 20 years doing this. So all of that together was my catalyst.
And this may be an awful question. You may not be able to answer it clearly. And the question may be the entire interview. But if you could define ageism just for somebody that's looking at this and like, what, other than the obvious, like what is ageism to you?
That's actually a great question. And yeah, I could probably spend the whole time, but in its broadest sense, ageism is discrimination based on age. So that means it can be ageism towards any other age group, right? When you're the in group and someone else is the out group. We see it more often towards older people because generally youth is valued more than old age is valued, and we stigmatize what it means to be old. But we do see it towards younger people as well. So that's all ageism. But when people think about ageism, I think they tend to think about it in a really surface kind of way. Like, well, yeah, isn't that like about discrimination at work? People not getting jobs, not getting hired, people not getting promoted. And that's just a piece of it. That is part of it, but it's a piece of it. Ageism is not only how we feel about other people that are differently aged, but more importantly, it's how we feel about ourselves as an aging person. And that's called internalized ageism.
Mm-hmm.
So it's other directed, it's personal directed, but then it's also relational. It's the way that we talk to each other. So it's the little things that we say, like when you've seen someone in 25 years and you bump into them on the street and you're like, hey, Bob, wow, you haven't aged a bit, or you look great for your age. It's
Mm-hmm.
those little innocuous things that are kind of creeping in there to say, well, what is my age supposed to look like? Or what do you mean I look great for my age?
Yeah.
Why do we qualify it? So it's relational. And then it's cultural. I mean, it's everywhere, from the fact that we have an anti-aging industry that thrives, to all of the different ways that we market what successful aging is supposed to look like, and who defines success. So it's complicated because it's in all levels of the system, from ourselves to our relationships, to our institutions, to our culture. And again, it's been around for so long that it's one of those things that you don't even really see it until you see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you see it everywhere.
And I feel like anyone who reads this book will probably have that reaction. Today, I was just scrolling through Facebook and somebody posted a new profile picture and they said, "Oh, you haven't aged today." And I just started laughing to myself, and just it's made me. I told you this before we started. I always skim books beforehand, and then I try to read them really close to the event so it's fresh in my mind. So I read the bulk of this yesterday, and just after that, like, I went to the grocery store this morning, and it made me perceive the people around me differently, because I was trying to get into the minds of people that were otherwise like probably just invisible to me.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
please just move a little faster so I can get around and get a shopping cart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is one of the reasons that I call the book Ageism Unmasked, because we literally have to take our mask off to be able to see it. And I will say to people, I'm so sorry, because once you talk to me or once you read the book, now you're going to see it everywhere. And it does kind of change the way you see everything.
Yes.
When you take that mask off. Yeah.
You had referenced this, but a quote from the book of, if you have negative feelings towards older people, you are more likely to struggle with negative feelings toward your own aging. And this is something that I don't have negative feelings toward older people. And there was another thought of people who struggle with mortality, which that is very much me. So it's something that I'm going to think on it more, because I still, even with reading it, I'm like, I don't know if that's me, because it's not so much the aging process, it's just the very end process for me. I would love to live to 120 and hobble around if need be. I just don't want that very end part that I'm not looking forward to. But I found that to be very interesting, something that I'm going to internalize. But to break down the attitudes about aging, if you can talk a bit about you have the cognitive component, the affective component, and the behavioral component.
Yeah, exactly. It's the easiest way to think about it is what we think, what we feel, and what we do. And they're all really connected. And I'll first say, I write about fear of death a little bit in the book. I touch on it a little bit. And I think it's conceptually different from fear of aging, but it's clearly connected. Because we do have fears about how it might happen, the losses associated with it, the fear of the unknown, all of those pieces. And I think in many ways society has made death a failure. So I think, there's layers of that as well. One of the reasons I think that we see ageism in healthcare quite a bit is actually that complex mix of fear of aging and fear of death. There's this theory that's called terror management theory. And I know it's academic, but it's kind of cool because it's basically saying we want to push away those people that remind us of those fears, that remind us of our mortality. It's like this protective mechanism. So yeah, so the fear of aging and the fear of death, I think, is kind of all together. It's lumped together, and it's hard to pick those things apart. But the cognitive, affective, and behavioral, it's, what we think. You might think something about older people. And I think in the book, I use an example of an older driver. I think all older drivers are bad. So then what you feel comes next. So if I think this, then I internalize that feeling and I feel like, well, then I don't want to be in the car with an older person just based on their age.
Yeah.
So what do I do, which turns into the action, is, well, I'm going to take the keys away from somebody that's older. So what we think translates to what we feel in our heart, and then that can easily lead to discrimination because we're jumping from A to Z very quickly just based on an assumption, just based on a generalization. And that's where it gets, difficult. And I think when it comes to any form of discrimination, that's what we're trying to do, is to break down those labels and that assumptions that we have, that just because somebody is older or looks a certain way or speaks a certain language or whatever it may be, that something about them is true. There's a great, I don't know if you know Chimamanda Adichie, but she has a wonderful TED Talk and book. She's a wonderful author, that's called The Single Story, The Danger of a Single Story. And what she says is that stereotypes aren't necessarily untrue, but they're always incomplete. And I love that, because when we see an older person, maybe some of the stereotypes we have in our mind are true, but you are not at all seeing the whole person that is there. And so the danger of the single story of aging is a single story of decline, that we just see aging as a process of decline. And meanwhile, aging is a process of growth and decline. It's development. It's both things. And I think that's another thing that makes it really complex, because we're holding these two competing ideas at the same time. How could something be good and bad, growth and decline?
Mm-hmm.
But aging is. It's all of those things. So it gets to the complexity of all of it.
Yeah. And you had gone over the steps, but just to put it into the words that you put them in, the steps of stereotyping, prejudice, and then discrimination, how the slippery slope of how you view things and how it can affect more severely down the line.
Exactly.
And one of the things that we should probably talk about first, because for the most part, just having the book on display in the store and promoting the event, I've had so many great conversations with customers who are like in their 70s and 80s, and even just friends of mine that were in our late 30s, talking about age and what like looking back when I was in like high school and seeing somebody my age now, like, do I feel like I'm that adult that I perceived when I was younger, and the mindset that goes behind that, and talking to older customers and how quickly they have viewed their life go by and how they still don't feel old, even though they're 70s and 80s and they're by definition older than me, at least. But it's resulted in a lot of great conversations. But I just had, this is, I think, the only customer that looked at it and like looked at the book and scoffed, or like, oh, now we're making a big deal about this now. So for that one person who's, I'm sure, not watching this, well, why does this matter? Why does ageism matter? You had talked about for your health, business, contributing to inequity, and if you can kind of explore those thoughts more.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But first, I'm going to just kind of reframe or challenge something you said.
Okay.
So what does feeling old, what does that actually mean?
Well,
so what is old?
Oh,
And I think that's something that we all need to think about. I think when we say, I don't feel old, right? Or someone who's 70 or 80 says, I don't feel old, they're defining old in a very specific way. And that's like as probably sickly or frail or irrelevant. But old in and of itself is just a neutral term to mean longer lived.
Yep.
So I think that just shows you how the stigma kind of comes in. We don't want to feel old. Well, why not? What if old was also about wisdom? What if old was also about comfort in our own bodies?
Mhm.
So just wanted to throw that out there because it's one of the ways we slide into it.
I think the conversation that I had with my friends. I think we talked about, do we feel like adults? But same.
Yes,
Yes.
same.
Yeah.
Exactly. But getting back to your
Yeah.
other question
Yeah.
of, why does it matter? And this is something that it's so surprising to me because I know all of this because I've been in gerontology for a long time, but we've actually had really solid evidence and solid research for decades now that how we feel about ourselves as aging people actually affects our health and it affects our well-being, like extremely much so. The stress that we carry around and the discomfort that we carry around and fear about being older actually makes us more likely to have diseases. It actually affects our longevity, up to 7.5 years of longevity. And that's just based on how we feel about ourselves. It actually increases our risk of dementia. It increases our risk of all kinds of things. It helps us, it reduces the chance of us recovering fast. So it takes longer for us to recover. There are really serious health consequences that are associated with ageism. And that's just the internalized ageism. That's not even being discriminated against. It also, it's related to social isolation. It's related to depression. It's related to all kinds of things, both mentally and physically. And yet we don't really talk about that so much. It's not out there in like the public health knowledge. We have other public
Mhm.
health messages like smoking. That's one that we used to think was okay. Now we recognize that it's really dangerous. We even talk about social isolation as being really dangerous, but we don't connect that how we feel about ourselves as aging people is just as dangerous for us. So that's one why.
Mhm.
Another why is that it's really bad for business. It's really bad for the economy. Not only does it keep older people out of jobs, but it prevents people from actually innovating in ways that would meet older people's needs and wants. We really tend to focus on products that we think older people need, like security, life alerts,
Mhm.
surveillance, how can we keep grandma or mom safe at home? But we don't think about their need for belonging, their need for self-actualization, the products that they really want. We hire the wrong people. So we hire people into jobs working with older people that don't necessarily like working with older people or that have a high level of ageism themselves, towards themselves. That loses a lot of money. So we have recruitment and retention issues. And then obviously it's a justice issue and an equity issue where it strips people of the right to age with meaning and purpose. And it strips them of the right to be contributors in their neighborhoods, in society. So there's a lot of reasons why it matters. And I love your question because this is not about political correctness. This is
Mhm.
not like
Yeah.
just say the right words and everything will be fine. This is actually about something much, much bigger. And it's you and it's your family and it's your children and it's your parents. And there's actually quite a lot at stake. So if there's one message that I could share, it would be that it really does matter for a lot of different reasons. And you can't pick a bad reason why.
There was a part when I was reading about the internal effect that it can have on your health. And it reminded, I've been rewatching Seinfeld recently. And there's a scene with Kramer and George at the coffee shop, and George is stressing about death, and Kramer's like, I don't care. And he's like, you see, you're going to live to 120 years old because you just don't care. I was surprised when I was reading this. I'm like, oh, there
Maybe
was
there's some truth to that. Exactly. Exactly.
there was been a couple there. I learned quite a bit from this, and I'm going to jump um, to a different topic at the risk of completely losing track of where I am in my notes. Um, but um, the number of people that are in some form of elder care, and the how low that number is compared to what people think that number is. It was like 4.5%. Was shocking to me.
Yeah, that's usually shocking to most people who think it's anywhere between 40 and 70% of people over 65 that live in segregated or congregate living. But no, 4.5% and actually dropping. More recent estimates have been closer to 2.5 or 3%. Older people want to live in their communities. They
Mhm.
want to live at home. They want to live in intergenerational communities. And yet we have created a system that largely segregates people. So yeah, that can be a really like, oh wow, shocking kind of number.
And actually my deviating from my note structure actually worked, because it was a good segue for the history of our relationship with elders. I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting to get a history lesson from the book, but I'm so glad that I did, because it puts so much context into where we are. I feel like, I don't know if it's an American thing or a worldwide thing, but we're bad at history. um, we see things that are going on now, and we just think that it's the way it's always been and the way that it will always need to be in the future. Um, so, if you can talk a little bit, there's some specific questions that I have, but just kind of an introduction to where we used to be. You can go back as far as you want to with that, because you went back pretty far in this.
I did. And one of the reasons I did that, again, going back to your very first question about why I wrote the book, I would very often get the question when I was doing talks on ageism is, but didn't we used to revere elders? And I'm like, I need to have a really solid answer. And now my answer is, well, yes and no, because it's been complicated from the very beginning. And that was actually really helpful for me in understanding why ageism is so pervasive and why it's complicated. Because the way that we have viewed aging and the way that we have viewed elders has always been complicated. So, yeah, I have references way back to looking at some ancient societies and some religious texts, and you can see that they elders and the term elders was definitely used in terms of leaders of the church, people that had knowledge, people that you would lean on and go to as leaders of communities. And that was certainly there. So we did have reverence with elders. But at the same time, there's very, very early references to wrinkles and remedies for wrinkles, to somebody being leaned over with using a cane or a staff, and that is a figure of old age, to really even starting to think about, remedies for old age. So we started to see very early on aging was kind of couched as a disease at the same time. Again, those two conflicting things that we're holding at the same time. And then over time, it just kind of built. And I talk about the Industrial Revolution in the book, which really is a pivotal time, because I think that really took us down a fork in the road, where people started moving away from family farms and moving to cities where jobs were. And that really not only changed the family structure, but changed how we thought about caregiving, where we started to think of childhood as a time when we needed to have protected space for young people to develop and to grow and to play. And so we started to really think of parenting as caregiving for younger people.
Mhm.
At the same time, we started to really build more and more of these institutions to house older people and people that were disabled and people that were poor. So we kind of farmed out caregiving for older people, and that became caregiving, which became associated with burden. So we separated childhood, parenting, from older adulthood, caregiving, and burden. And that really took us down an interesting fork in the road. And the same with, the proliferation of segregation, where we really started to build physical structures to segregate people that needed care. And then from there, it just kind of spirals into in the workplace and retirement, and how pension systems changed, and how we started to equate youth with productivity, and better integration with technology, and how we started to see older people as, we needed to get them out because they did things the old way. And
Mhm.
all of that happened kind of around the turn of the Industrial Revolution, and just kind of went on and on from there.
There was one of the aspects of the Industrial Revolution, or one of the things that changed that, I found really interesting, was the invention of the printing press,
Mhm.
and how that took away from the elders' responsibility of carrying the news and carrying on the family information, the history of the culture, became less important when you could just print things down.
Exactly. And now think about, the printing press was one thing, and now think about the technology that we have where you can find out anything, even your genealogy, in
Mhm.
a second. These were prized roles of elders. They were the keepers of the knowledge, they were the tellers of the stories. And now all of a sudden we didn't need them to do
Yeah.
that anymore. So yeah, that was definitely pivotal.
This kind of on its own topic, but one that I want to talk about because one of the focuses of our store is building empathy within our community. But I want to address the problem with empathy when it comes to ageism that you had addressed in your book. Um,
Uh, Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. So when it came to empathy,
yes.
and how I was talking about, are you talking specifically about like the suit that I was talking about and how we build empathy and often like trip over into promoting fear?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So and it's funny you bring that up. I was at an event once and my kids were there with me. And it was probably the time that I embarrassed them the most. Like they were so embarrassed because I saw this aging suit. It was in the middle of this fair. And I started to freak out because I'm like, that's not aging. Like, what are you doing? You're
Mhm.
basically putting on a suit to mimic decline. And they were thinking, well, if you put on this suit and you can see what it's like to have macular degeneration and you can feel what it's like to have arthritis and decreased mobility, then you'll have more empathy for older people. And I'm like, I get it. I really do. And I think empathy is really, really important. However, at the same time, you can't possibly capture the psyche of any given older person by putting on a suit. You can't
Mhm.
possibly capture all of the things that they are feeling in their head that actually protect them from feeling a sense of loss or decline by a suit. And do we want to trip over into really thinking about empathy is the way we want to go, or do we just want to think about kind of human connection? So I get it. But when empathy trips over into now I am afraid of aging because you have only given me one small piece of this larger picture of what aging is, I think that's really dangerous and I think it's really short-sighted. And I think that there's other ways that we can build empathy through human connection, not by mimicking physical, diseases.
Yeah.
And that whole experience really struck me. And people still think that this is, a helpful way to train people. And I will get on my soapbox and say, I don't think so.
Well, I think if anything, it could just be a part of it when you're in that body, but then you also need the psychological aspect of you're in you could be in a body like this or not, and you still have hopes and desires and plans no matter what age you are. Uh,
Exactly. And it doesn't account for things like the U curve of happiness. The U curve of happiness shows us that people earlier in life and later in life are actually the happiest, that they actually report the highest level of life satisfaction. And there's so much research that older people feel that way despite even having their physical limitations.
mhm.
It's all that we've earned over the years. It's all the ways that we've grown and we can cope better and we feel freer to be ourselves and we feel more authentic for who we are and we don't care so much about what other people think, which is very freeing for
Mhm.
people. So it's like older people, even with even potential cognitive or physical limitations, are still thriving, are still feeling like I'm okay. I'm pretty
Mhm.
good in myself. Yeah, a suit doesn't capture that.
Yeah, the only people that you really see dancing around or singing a song to themselves in public are little kids and older adults.
Yeah, it's like freeing. They're
Yeah.
like, I don't care. This is me. It feels good to be me.
For anyone who has joined us in the middle of this, we are talking. I always try to make sure I'm pronouncing your names correctly.
Gendron.
Gendron?
Gendron.
All
Hmm.
right, I've been saying it incorrectly.
That's okay.
We are
Close
talking
you up.
with Dr. Tracey Gendron, of the author of Ageism Unmasked. If you have any questions or comments, throw them into whatever Facebook or YouTube that you are using, and we will see them on our end, and we will do our best to address them. My mom is watching, and she was talking about my grandfather at our wedding was on the dance floor the whole time, and he was around 90. She can fact check me on that one. I can't do the math in my head right now. So the one thing that we got into earlier that I'm not going to, and we talked about it a couple of times, but caregiving as an industry. And I think that just from perspective of seeing money as a problem for a lot of things, once you find a problem and then find a way to make money off of it, it becomes a larger problem.
Yep,
Um,
indeed.
so if you can talk a little bit about, sorry, it's almost more so how recent things have changed within since like the 50s and 60s, in terms of caregiving and retirement communities.
Yeah. So with caregiving, it was the 60s, 70s, 80s even that we started to really do research on caregiver burden. And I blame my own discipline for that. I think we were the ones who really pathologized what it meant to be a caregiver, and started to really talk about dependence as a failure, dependence as a burden, instead of talking about how caregiving is a natural, normal part of life at all stages. We are always interdependent. So it kind of goes to this myth of independence, of what we call that we should strive to be independent always at all ages. But we're never wholly independent. We always need other people in our lives. So by really going in that direction, I think we really started to stigmatize what caregiving for older people meant and means. And then, as I talked about before, we also then started kind of farming it out. So it became not family members as families split apart, but it became more people that we paid to do caregiving for older people. And I will segue quickly to say that that was another very painful lesson from COVID, is that it was very clear that we not only devalue older people, think that they are expendable, think this is just an old person's disease, but it was very clear that we devalue the people that work for and with older people. Mm-hmm. So the fact that long-term care communities were hit the hardest with COVID, and the vast majority of deaths came from those congregate environments of both residents and staff members. And yet we didn't hail the direct care staff as heroes. We didn't prioritize getting them PPE. Said a lot about our value system. It said a lot that we don't pay people who work to support older people in those communities a living wage very often, that they have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. So it shows you the systemic ageism that exists, within all the levels, that it's not just about the older people, but it is about the carers. It is about the caregivers. And that's structural ageism that I hope that we're starting to look at and starting to address, because there's certainly more conversations about it now. So, that's kind of what the story that happened with caregiving. And even now, we tend to think of multi-generational and intergenerational families as sandwiched and as stressed. And again, we have created it as not the norm, that we just care for older people and that older people can care for us. So that's one piece. And then, with retirement, I kind of have a different take on this than a lot of people do, but I think it's really a problem that we have turned a social institution, because retirement is a social institution, into a life stage. Mm-hmm. And that did happen in the 50s, as you said, when we literally started building these communities where 55 and older, 60 and older, 65 and older could go and live. And we started to glamorize retirement as the active retirement lifestyle. So people started, equating retirement with, this must be kind of my stage of life. So when I meet somebody and the first thing they say to me is, I'm retired, I'm like, all right, that's great. That tells me that you used to work at a job, but tell me about you. I want to know more about you. Who are you as a person? What are your goals? What are your dreams? What is your purpose? What are you doing? Retirement doesn't give that. Retirement is about withdrawal. And that's why I use the term elderhood. I think elderhood is a very purposeful, strengths-based developmental stage of life that comes after adulthood, that looks quantitatively and qualitatively different than adulthood, not based on productivity, not based on financial contribution, but based on a number of different things. But to me, that's strengths, whereas retirement is withdrawal. So, but as you said, people make money from it, and people certainly make money from this whole retirement dream. And the other thing about it is some people don't want to retire. So to make an assumption that everybody wants to, that everybody can afford to, that's actually classist, ableist, ageist. It's all kinds of things. There are many people who get a lot of purpose and meaning from work, and they would be better off never retiring because that's what drives them. And I think we need to allow for that and account for that. But now we don't. We have an expectation that you want to live a life of leisure. Well, I write in the book, vacations are only special because they end. So leisure's not enough. We need a reason to get up in the morning. We need a reason for purpose. And that can be anything. It can be from a hobby, but it can be from work. It can be from caregiving. It can be from, whatever it is that speaks to you. But to not discount that older people, no matter how old, still have the need for purpose and belonging, I think is really, really important. And I think retirement took us away from that.
And a lot of that is focused on our relationship with work, as you had mentioned. I didn't close the door all the way. Windy, and it just blew in. I'm like, is somebody coming in right now? Am I about to get robbed? So,
oh no!
My stomach
is just the wind.
We're normally closed now, so I'm like, why is somebody walking in? Sorry about that. My stomach just dropped a little bit. That would have been an interesting virtual event of me fighting off an intruder. Anywho, so work as our identity. It's not like you had referenced it as I think it was France, like the French people, if they find it offensive when your first question is, what do you do? Is it an American problem with retirement, or is it more wide scale because of our Americans' relationship with work?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more wide scale. And when you look at the research on ageism, everybody asks this question too. You see that ageism is everywhere. So it is in every continent. It is in every country. And as we become more capitalistic in nature, we tend to see ageism more and more because we tend to see that focus on productivity and economic contributions and efficiency. So retirement, I can't speak to as much, but because I know that ageism is kind of ubiquitous everywhere, I assume that it's similar patterns everywhere. There's a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called The Blue Zones. And the Blue Zones looks at geographic areas that have the longest lived people. So they're all centenarians. And they went and they studied these groups of people in these different areas. One is Santorini, Greece. One is Loma Linda, California. There's many all over the place. And what they found was, I think a lot of these societies that don't have a term for retirement do pretty well because people have a sense of belonging and they have a sense of purpose. And it's true that word retirement doesn't translate to all different cultures.
Yeah.
So there probably is something that is unique to this culture, but at the same time, ageism itself is pretty ubiquitous.
And getting into what you classified as the era of manipulation, there's one thing that it just stuck with me. I had a music teacher in elementary school, and when you're in elementary school, everyone just seems old because you're a little kid.
Yeah.
But he seemed like a very old man. My sister, who is older than me, agreed, and she had him 6 years before I did. But he talked about the importance of smile lines. And he probably said that when I was in second grade, and I just forever remembered, like, it became a goal for me of like, oh, I want to make sure that I smile enough that I have smile lines when I'm older. Random story, but it popped in my head as I was reading The Era of Manipulation and how advertising, and it became a thing of a racing age. So if you can talk a bit about the growth of that and when that started. You talked about how it's always kind of existed, but now it's a huge.
Yeah, huge. I think we really started to lean into that in the 1980s is when we started marketing the term anti-aging. And that's, I think truly when the industry itself really started to thrive. And I call it an industry. There's kind of two pieces. There's anti-aging medicine, and then there's kind of the anti-aging cosmetics kind of piece. Um, Essentially, though, it's saying, that we want to fight aging. We want to erase the visible signs of aging. We're in a war or in a battle against aging, which, the militaristic terms just drive me crazy because, again, aging is like the process of growth and development, too. Why would we want to be against that? Aging is living, aging is changing. So, but that's when we really started, I think, to have a lot of shame put on us. Now, look, there's always been shame. We have always been taught what the standard of beauty is, what the standard of success is, what we're supposed to look like, what we're supposed to wear, all of those things. And I mean that for both men and women, presents in different ways. In the book, I talk about it, masculinity and femininity. The anti-aging industry just really capitalizes on that. So, it tells us, well, you're more successful at aging and, you sure look better if you don't have wrinkles or if you don't have gray hair. Or for men, what are they told is success? Well, that you have to have your testosterone in check, that you have to have a potency about you. Otherwise, you're a failure. So they have really leaned into this, and it's effective because fear sells and shame sells. So, in that chapter, I really just wanted people to kind of see it and then make their own choice. And I'm really clear in there that I have nothing against anybody that decides to use an anti-aging cream or a product or have a procedure or dye their hair. If it makes you feel good about yourself, then by all means, do things that make you feel good. But I don't want people to be driven by shame or some definition of success that they are not creating for themselves, but marketers are creating for them. So it's more of like a, just see it and then decide for yourself why you're doing this and whether this really does fit you and your goals. It's a very, very powerful industry, multi-billion-dollar industry. And we just suck it up. And how great for them, because it's like, it's something that can never be achieved. We're never ever going to get rid of the wrinkles. If we do, we may even look very different or plastic or whatever you want to, call it for people that don't even look themselves any longer. But so it's like an insatiable appetite for something that's never going to meet its intended goal. And that's quite brilliant in terms of marketing, but maybe not healthy in terms of, our well-being.
There is a question that I wanted to get into from Lynn. She's curious about whether historic elder burden you learned of was the same in non-working classes. Thinking of Dahlwalker status. I will just mumble that. Status in landed gentry and how burden may have been rooted in hunger/need.
That's a great question, Lynn. And yeah, I think there's definitely differences there in terms of class, in terms of race, in terms of kind of different cultures, and how people see elders and their relationship with elders. So yeah, I think there's absolutely some truth to that. And even now, there's differences in the people that kind of do or are more likely to send relatives to an institutional kind of care versus those that are more inclined to stay with them at home in intergenerational families. So yeah, I think there's definitely truth to that.
There's another audience question. Dr. Tracey, can you speak to the word crone?
Yeah, so I like the word crone. Crone is from paganism, and it's a ritual that older women will often go through, and I think it can be used to really kind of claim your power. I like reclaiming the word crone if somebody does see it with stigma, to take the power of it. Because it is all about femininity and power and potency in a very positive kind of way. There's croning ceremonies, which are done where older women are like ushering in the next group of women who have reached a certain age to kind of welcome them. And I think if anything, we really should learn from that, because we need more celebrations. We need more reasons to say, yes, I have reached this milestone in my life. I have reached this marker in my life, and I want to celebrate it. And truthfully, when you think about older age, we have retirement parties, and then we don't have a whole lot more. So if we can use this concept of croning, if we can use this concept of like, wow, okay, I'm going to be initiated into elderhood, and I am going to claim my power around that. Whew, wouldn't that be amazing?
For somebody like myself who may be watching or listening who has no idea what Crone is, could you give us a Crone for dummies?
It's basically just it's a term for an older woman.
Okay.
So at its most basic. And a croning ceremony, like I said, is like, come, you can now join this group of powerful older women.
Gotcha.
That are, claiming their power.
And that actually serves as a good segue, just not a question, but a comment from Anne Marie. She is a hospice nurse, and they learn that celebrating the end of someone's life is just as important as celebrating a birth.
Absolutely. I think that's very, very true and beautiful. And yay to the hospice nurses who are out there celebrating those lives every day.
There was one question that I had once I got to the elderhood section of the book. The use of the word elderhood in contrast to, I think you were quoting somebody in the book, but just the stigma around the word elderly. What is the difference between elderly and elderhood, and why do you feel is one okay and the other not?
That's such a great question. And I don't think any of these like terms or euphemisms or anything that we decide on is ever going to work until we take the stigma away. Mm-hmm. So the reason that I have backed away from using the term elderly for a long time is because elderly really connotes a homogenous group of older people that are frail. That's how you think about it, right? When you hear the term elderly, in your mind, you're thinking of just a group of older people that are all alike, and they're all kind of frail and declining and weak. And the truth is that as we age, the older that we are, the less like each other we are. So aging is actually very heterogeneous, not homogeneous. So that term elderly just doesn't fit, because we don't then see how different people are from one another as they age. Mm-hmm. And then we're also seeing aging, when we use elderly again, as that process of decline instead of that process of growth. So I've moved away from that. But to me, the term elder has a lot of power and potential. And as I write about in the book, we have all of these stages of life that we talk about. We talk about infancy. Well, who's in infancy? An infant. We talk about childhood. Who's in childhood? A child. We talk about adulthood. Who's in adulthood? Adult. So an elder is an elderhood. And I think if someone feels that they wouldn't want to be called an elder, I would just then prompt them to say, well, why? Because it's stigmatized, because you feel as if same as old, same as senior, same as any other term. We don't want to be called it because we don't feel comfortable, because we feel as if we're being judged. So ultimately, we can have all the right words or the wrong words, but until we take the meaning back and we say to ourselves, it's okay to be old, it's okay to be an elder, the words aren't really going to matter. We really have to focus on the meaning first.
I thank you for that. That helps. I wanted to give you the platform that you had in the book, but in a live setting, to rant about the 100th day of school ceremony.
Thank you. Okay, for all of you out there who don't know the 100th day of school. So the 100th day of school in elementary school is often celebrated with a dress like a 100-year-old day activity. So what you will see is all of these, young children coming in that are dressed up like old people. They'll have curlers, they'll have glasses, they'll wear walkers, all kinds of things like that. And then we have very well-meaning parents who put these pictures all over social media, and everyone's going, oh, they're so cute. Isn't that adorable? But it's not. It's just not. What it's doing is it's creating caricatures out of older people. And we would never think to do that with any other demographic group of people. we would know that that's really inappropriate, because essentially it is making fun of them. And yet that still hasn't clicked when we talk about the 100th day of school. Meanwhile, I could think of so many ways that we can celebrate the 100th day of school in a way that's empowering. What if we talked about the stories of 100-year-olds? What if we talked about who we hope to be when we're 100? What if we even just counted 100 jelly beans and, did it in a different way that didn't have to do with age? And this is just really common. This is something that's done, and yet we learn ageism from a very young age. Ageism is not innate. Ageism is something that is taught, and that's one of the ways that it seeps in. So when you start to think about the damage we're doing by setting up young kids to be fearful of their future selves and make fun of their future selves, maybe then it'll start to click that there's better ways to do this. And thank you for giving me that I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I would recommend, because it just happened recently at our kids' school, the 100th day, as it did in every other school district. But next year, I would recommend putting together a social media post of this section of the book, so then we can all share it.
Do it. Absolutely.
And just to kind of get to the closing of this, you put in the book of like what some of your hopes are, to develop an understanding of what age is, developing your own personal understanding of what you hope your later years will look like. What is kind of your overall hope with the book and the takeaways people will have from it?
Yeah, I think it's really simple. I mean, in the broadest sense, what I want everyone to see is that they are all aging. There's no such thing as a non-aging person. So this is about everybody. This truly is, and it matters at all ages and stages of our life. For me, my aha moment when I first discovered ageism was disassociating myself from the aging population. I was like, I'm a gerontologist because I work on behalf of the aging population. And then I'm like, wait a second, I'm part of the aging population. Why am I talking about this like this is somebody else? Why am I talking about like this is old people? And it was that first aha moment for me that set me on the path that I'm on now. So I think that's the first barrier, is stop othering. This is about all of us. Then it's connecting to your why. And then it's really connecting to, why does this matter to me? Why should I care? And kind of figuring out what your source of motivation is. I think that's the next. And then I think you're setting out on the journey. And as you said, now you're going to see it everywhere. Mm-hmm. But once that light bulb comes on, once the mask comes off, then you have the chance to be more proactive and make some choices. And I think in the end, my main goal is to have the mask come off in a different way. So can you imagine if at all stages and ages of our life, we could take our masks off and stop hiding behind the need to be youthful and look youthful and feel youthful and just be our unique selves at every age? Imagine the power that we would have to say, this is me at 51. This is it. This is me. I'm 51. And then 10 years, say, this is me at 61 and I'm good. This is me at 71. I'm good. Mm-hmm. I think that there'd be a better world if we could all have that, if we could take back that power, if we could reclaim what it means to be old. So I think that's what I want, is just for each person to take this in and to make it meaningful for themselves. And then again, to take their power back.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to plug some of our upcoming events, but thank you all for tuning in and watching this or listening to this. I am committed. We have this as a podcast, but I've been very slow to get our past episodes edited and up, but I'm going to correct that and we'll have this up quickly. I'll let you know. But Ageism Unmasked, if you are in our area, please pick it up in the store. You can also order it online at Good Neighbor Books. If you are not in our area, you can still buy it from us through the website, but also encourage your local independent bookstore to have it in stock because it is a great book. Our next event is going to be Ripple, which is a true crime story about a John Doe and a missing person that existed alongside each other for 9 years, and then we're finally connected. It's written by a children's singer-songwriter who took a turn with his a brief turn with his career to write this true crime story because it's a person that he knew from his childhood. May 18th, we're going to be talking with Matthew Crawford, Cordell. I don't know where I got Crawford from. Matthew Cordell for Hello Neighbor, The Kind and Caring World of Mr. Rogers. I met Matthew in January of 2020 before the world shut down. This book had the misfortune of coming out in April of 2020 when every bookstore in the country was closed. So I had an opportunity to connect with that publisher. They said, "What events would you like to do?" And I said, "Can we promote Matthew's book?" because it came out when the world was shut down. June 2nd, we were going to be talking with the author that I don't have the book with me, but it's How Free Speech Saved Democracy. And June 29th is going to be I Can Take It From Here. That is going to be a powerful one with a woman who murdered her abusive spouse, spent 15 years in prison. She is now released, and she has started up a company because she saw the struggle that she had after being released and finding a job. So now she has a company connecting with recently released prisoners and businesses that are willing to hire them. So this book is her story, and that's June 29th. But all of our events are listed on our website, goodneighborbooks.com, and you can register for the event so you'll get frequent reminders so you don't miss them. Thank you again, Tracey, for joining us tonight, and thank you all for watching and the great questions that you had throughout. And have a nice night, everybody.